Assalamu alaikum. It's about 4 a.m. It's one of my favorite times of the day, alhamdulillah. And the amount of clarity of thought that you get at this time, everyone who experiences it knows it, and the amount of blessings as well, and the amount of barakah. But anyway, I know the lighting and everything is not good, but I'm going to turn this into a podcast episode and use the audio, inshallah. Topic of the video is be willing to live a contrarian life for different results. Be willing to live differently if you want different results, right? And the reason why I'm making this video and this topic idea came to me is because I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and it reminded me, because it's quite a frequent conversation that you'll have, and we were talking about something, and in response I said, well, you can do this, and the response was, that's not realistic, or something along the lines of, that doesn't really happen in real life, kind of thing. And it got me thinking that really it's not that it doesn't happen in real life, but it's the fact that only a minority of people do it. In this particular case, it was about marriage, and it was about a topic in marriage, and I said, well, if it's that important, you should get it in the contract. And they were like, it doesn't work like that, kind of thing, right? Fair enough. I don't know, I haven't experienced it, but I'm just using this as an example, right, to illustrate a larger point. So the larger point is, anything in life where there's exceptional performance, Deen or Dunya, there's a process that's been followed, right, by whoever's kind of achieved this level. And if you analyze it, that those steps can be replicated, but oftentimes you'll see that it's a very contrary to what the masses do. There's a saying that they say, like, look at what the masses do and do the opposite, and you'll probably achieve your outcome or achieve a level of kind of success that the average isn't getting, right? I'm not talking about success in like the self-help world of like, oh, money and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking in any dimension. If you even apply it to the religion, then if you're praying your salah 5 times a day, and if you're a practising Muslim, then you're already living in a kind of a way that people aren't used to. You're already living in a kind of unique way. You're already doing things in your day-to-day life that are quite rare and hard to do. And that kind of applies to anything else. So anyway, I have a tendency to just go off on one, and I don't think sometimes the point is clear. But what I'm trying to say is, instead of saying, oh, that doesn't happen in real life, accept the reality that it can happen, but unfortunately you're not willing to take the steps because you're still chained down by the opinions of other people. But you have to accept that in any domain, if you want the kind of results that are hard to get, you have to live in a different way. You have to take different actions. Fitness. If you're someone who wants to be lean all year round and that kind of thing, if you follow the process that people who are like that do, they're going to count their calories, macros, they're going to have a gym routine. It's probably less than 10% of people, less than 5% of people do that. In the Deen, if you're someone who prays 5 times a day, if you're someone who kind of avoid certain gatherings, you're gonna find certain processes, certain action steps, certain mindsets that not a lot of people do. If you kind of if you look at saints or spiritual people, the way they are, it's attained through years of living in a way that's different to 99.9% of the people. What I'm trying to say is, any domain you can find this, right? And if you look at people who have done hifz, right, spending 4 years, 3-4 hours a day, going to the masjid after school, reading Qur'an and everything, it's like 0.1% of the population for people at that age, or kids at that age. But the end result is something kind of very unique. But again, if you trace the steps, if you say that you want to live the ordinary life and do what the average person does, and yet get all of this, completely unrealistic. Average person is watching TV 4 hours a day. Average person thinks getting up and going to the gym at this time is madness. Average person, if you're still worried about the average person and their views, alhamdulillah, that's fine, but then accept Don't say that something is not possible. Accept reality. I was going to conclude the episode, but I think there's a few more points to include that will help kind of round off the topic. I can give more examples that show how a certain result was caused by a different set of actions contrary to what the masses of people do or what most people do. But I think you get the point. But I also wanted to extend the point to information. Things like, I always talk about mental diet, things like distraction. If you're constantly have your notifications on, I haven't had my notifications on for years, only occasionally, and that's because you're constantly on this kind of edge of awaiting and responding to other people's agenda, not having time to focus on yourself and your own priorities. Reading books is a counter-cultural example. How many people read books on a regular? So that's another example. So, and the main one that I was going to talk about is, a lot of people will say, what's this based on? You've got this, when I see reminders online, a lot of it goes back, they make sure to mention the Qur'an and Sunnah, and sometimes I try to avoid that because I'm not qualified in that domain. I don't really need to give examples of that because we all know the Deen, we all know the history, we all know the transformation that occurred in Saudi Arabia, how this Bedouin people were transformed into one of the biggest empires in the world. It's all about changing culture and changing practices and mindsets. Even if you think of the early scholars and their practices, I was listening to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf talk about, or I was reading in his book when he mentions how there were certain scholars that would visualize being in the grave, or some of them even had coffins in their houses that they used to sit in or lie in to help make it more vivid. Right? These are all examples of behavior that are completely countercultural, right? And it applies to our lives as well. And just to conclude the point, I like to leave with some practical tips or benefits. You might say, how can I help that? How can I change what I'm interested in? Or how can I change what I value? Or how can I change my way of thinking if I am bound by these kind of constraints that limit my behavior or actions? It goes back down to what you're putting in your mind, because what you put in your mind shapes your metrics of what you feel is normal, which is why it goes back to who you surround yourself with, how that changes behavior, is because, and you extend that to what you're exposing your mind to on a daily, through your listening and watching and everything like that. That shapes your boundaries of what you think is possible. So if you want to change what you think is normal behavior, you need to change your input, whether that's through online means or whether that's through the people that you associate with. That's all it is. It's quite simple. And it goes back to one of the key topics behind the Optimized Muslim Project, which is this self-development, or believing that you can change and improve, reclaiming that power with the will of Allah. Because if you don't, and it's all excuses and it's all, oh, this isn't possible and they're different, and whenever you see someone doing anything a bit different, you ascribe it to them being different or gifted or mad or some other excuse. That's on you. But you don't want to kind of go through your life and end up with regret, or even on that day, or even in the akhirah. So again, if you resonate with this kind of message, spread it. If you don't, alhamdulillah. A good way of kind of self-assessing whether or not this is something that you need to be concerned about, this whole issue of whether or not you give too much weight to what's seen as normal, and whether that's affecting your long-term goals in Deen or Dunya, is how much of your current behavior is dictated by things like this. If you're already living in a way where you do things differently and you have different habits and routines and everything else, you've not really got anything to worry about. Whereas if you live very much according to the status quo, not when you think of doing something, you think, oh, what will people think? Well, that's not normal. That makes me a bit crazy. And then you're projecting into the future about something else and think you're going to do things differently. You need to tackle the underlying point. You're not going to be able to suddenly change your behavior for a specific thing. You might be able to, but it's unlikely.